The terror most of us know is anonymous, a backstreet mugger, an urban guerrilla, or even more anonymous, the threat of nuclear war. But what happens when the terror has a face on it, when it's one of our neighbors, a bully? The man who terrorized Skidmore, Missouri was just that, a bully who struck fear into the heart of a town. Even the town marshal was scared to take him on. A one-man reign of terror in a town that just didn't know how to handle it. It would be hard to find a patch of America more rural than northwestern Missouri. The countryside here in Nottoway County is almost absurdly beautiful. It is America pastoral, untouched by big cityness. Not outgoing with strangers, but good neighbors with each other. Less lovely than most of the county is the town of Skidmore. The population, 437, is just about the same as it was in the census of 1880. Only 2 paved streets, a few run-down storefronts that look as if they've never seen better days, and not much more. There's no great history of violence or crime in this part of Missouri. The last murder anyone remembers in Skidmore happened 60 years ago. Every small town has a Ken McElroy, only he was worse than most. This was his home just out of town. He was 47, a big burly man. There was an air about him that frightened people, and he did nothing to alter the effect. He bought and sold hunting dogs, had an armory of guns, and always a big wad of cash. Just about everyone in these parts feared McElroy. Bill Everhart knew him since he was a boy.
He wasn't the kind of a man that would fight another man out in the streets. He used a gun.
There's more to Ken Rex McElroy versus the town of Skidmore than just the story of a local bully and frightened townspeople. What it represents is a classic conflict of rights in a democratic society. The right that even the worst among us has to freely move about, and the right that a community has to be protected from the worst among us. In the case of McElroy versus Skidmore, that conflict could not be more bitter. There's Romaine Henry's story. He's a farmer who says he was stopped on a country road by McElroy, who accused Henry of spying on him. And then...
he said, well, you're a lying SOB. And when he said that, well, then he more or less laid the barrel of that shotgun right against my stomach and pulled the trigger. And when he did, why, of course, it laid my flesh all open and blew my flesh into this door here.
Another shot hit Henry in the face. While the gunman was reloading, Henry managed to drive away. There was a trial. 2 witnesses claimed McElroy was elsewhere at the time of the shooting, and he was found not guilty. How could he get witnesses to do that?
Well, I suppose that, I don't know, but I suppose probably money had a little something to do with it.
He told me last winter, when he shot the dirty son of a bitch, that was Romaine Henry, he thought he had him shot deep enough that he'd die before he got home.
He told you that?
He told me that himself just last winter. And his brother...
Why didn't you come forward?
What for? Why should I tell that when they made such a fool out of the man that they shot?
There was Ernest Bowenkamp. He's a man of 71 who, along with his wife Lois, operates the town grocery store. There was some bad blood between McElroy and the Bowenkamps over a piece of penny candy. One day, McElroy turned up at the loading bay behind the store where Mr. Bowenkamp was sitting, watching the world go by.
Turned around while I was looking down the double-barrel shotgun. And I thought to myself, now, is he going to shoot or is he just going to scare me? So I thought if he's going to shoot, I better dodge over. So I dodged over just in time. He got released my neck. And that's all that story, because I was out the rest of the time.
I've known him all my life, besides the 7 years I've been married with him, and he was never that way. He never caused no trouble with nobody. You know, he was a good man.
What about the Bowenkamps?
I wasn't with him that day. You know, I couldn't answer for that. I do know it was self-defense.
His wife, Trina, is either his 3rd or 4th wife. They began seeing each other 10 years ago when she was 14. At 16, she accused him of rape.
Yes, he was charged with it. But it's not true.
You brought the charge against him.
Yes, and it's not true.
Why did you do it?
Jealousy. I was jealous over him, but it's not true. He never had to do anything like that in the first place.
Apart from that rape charge, McElroy had perhaps 24 other felony charges in this and neighboring counties over the years. Assault with a deadly weapon, molesting a minor, cattle rustling, hog rustling, burglary, theft, and on and on. He was only found guilty once. The lawyer who got him out of most of his scrapes with the law was Richard McFadden of Kansas City.
Ken Rex McElroy was a perfect gentleman. He was a good client.
He sure needed a lawyer an awful lot.
Yes, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, it's a set of circumstances. He says, they're trying to get me, they're harassing me. I didn't do it.
But he did have a reputation for violence. He was known as the Jesse James of Northwest Missouri.
I have heard him called the Jesse James of the northwest part of Missouri. That is correct.
Well, he wasn't. So he might not have been the perfect gentleman that you just said he was.
I say only in his relationship with me. He was a fearless type person. In other words, anybody say, you can't go here, and if it's his right to go, and it wasn't a judge or somebody telling him he couldn't do it, he would go if he wanted to go.
But he was more than that. He was more than just fearless. He was harassing people.
And you know something? I have never been able to verify these allegations that he was harassing anybody.
The local preacher, Tim Warren, would disagree. He's a friend of Bowenkamp, and just before McElroy's trial for the shooting of Ernest Bowenkamp, Warren says McElroy and Trina turned up at Warren's church armed with a machine gun.
I noticed that he and Trina were out of the truck, and he had the machine gun out and in his hand, and I had a gun with me. I didn't want to use it, but if the man would have put a clip in that gun, I would have used it to protect my family.
Just before your husband's trial for the Bowenkamp shooting, he turned up in town, convoy of trucks. Any one of those trucks was a submachine gun.
No.
What kind of weapons did you have?
We had shotguns and 22s and 410s, stuff like that.
The only real law enforcement is 12 miles away, and by the time the sheriff could get a car to Skidmore, McElroy would be gone. Most people felt that the legal system allowed McElroy to get away with what amounted to a reign of terror.
You say the system allowed him to harass the town. Mr. McElroy was working within that system.
It may not be the letter of the law, but the spirit of our law is that one is protected from men like McElroy.
All right. You had the sheriff's department. You had the state highway patrol. You had, at one time, you did have a marshal in Skidmore, Missouri.
Why don't you have a marshal?
The marshal resigned.
Why did he resign?
And I do not know why he resigned.
You know darn well why he resigned. He resigned. We are told, and I think you have been told
right.
as well, he resigned because Ken Rex McElroy put a gun in his head.
Up at the bar one night, he caught me coming outside and pulled a gun out and was holding it there, and he asked me if I was going to testify against him. I told him I'd have to go over because I was a marshal.
David Dunbar was marshal, but for only 6 months. He was to be a witness in the Bowenkamp shooting. After this encounter with McElroy, he quit the job and went into business wiring up houses for cable TV.
He said that he would believe in killing a man that wanted to put him in the pen for the rest of his life.
Were you frightened of him that night?
Yeah, I sure was. Anytime you're looking at a gun, you don't know if he's going to shoot you or what he's even thinking. He may have just been trying to scare me. But he did the job.
But every time I tried a case, there were all kinds of witnesses. I never could see anybody that was intimidated. And the jury, 12 people, decided he was not guilty. That's our system.
Well, that's how intimidation works, is you never see people who've been intimidated.
You know, I never had any evidence of any intimidation. I had one man that said he shot me in the stomach. Here's a man.
Listen, I'm not doubting your talents as a great defense lawyer.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to give that impression.
A year after shooting grocer Bowenkamp, McElroy finally comes to trial. He is charged with first-degree assault with a deadly weapon. and faces a minimum of 10 years in prison and possibly up to life imprisonment. But the charge is reduced, and he's given only 2 years. That experienced country lawyer, Richard McFadden, was proud of his defense and happily says that McElroy would probably serve only 6 or 7 months. His adversary was prosecutor David Baird. Only 3 years out of law school, just months as prosecutor.
Once they did that, we went to trial. We received a felony conviction on the individual, and we had an order that he would go to the state penitentiary.
Hold on a minute.
Okay.
2 years.
2 years.
Which might have been, by the time he actually went to jail, what, 6 months?
6 months, 8 months, someplace along in there. But that's not something we have any control over. That's something the jury says.
Skidmore was outraged by what the town regarded as a slap on the wrist for such a brutal attack. And then further outraged when McElroy was freed on appeal after posting a $40,000 bond. Skidmore felt once again that McElroy had beaten the system. Then one day, along comes McElroy into the D&G tavern, followed by Trina, who's carrying a carbine and a bayonet. Allegedly, McElroy picks up both and starts showing off and boasting that he's going to finish off Mr. Bowenkamp. Now, if that happened, it was a clear violation of his bond arrangement, and a number of citizens sign a complaint to that effect. A hearing is called to see if his bond should be revoked. It is scheduled for July 10th, 1981. The town also calls a meeting for July 10th at the American Legion Hall to form a group to attend the bond revocation hearing. But word comes that the hearing's been postponed for 10 days. They discuss how to protect the people who signed the complaint against McElroy. Someone announces McElroy's in town, drinking at the D&G bar. Most of the people walk over to the bar.
We left the D&G and went to our pickup. And as soon as we walked out the door, everybody else walked out the door behind us. And they gathered around on my side over here, on my passenger side of the truck. He hadn't started the pickup yet. We just sitting there. I looked at them to see what they was looking at, see if they wanted anything, and they were just staring.
High noon in Skidmore, Missouri, on a hot, dusty day last July. There is a tension, a sense of showdown in the air.
I seen the man go across the street, go to his pickup, take the gun out, and I seen him shoot it.
A number of shots were fired. Exactly how many can't be determined. 15 minutes later, sheriff's deputies arrived to find the street empty and Ken Rex McElroy dead. There may have been as many as a dozen people outside the D&G and around McElroy's pickup at the time of the shooting. Or there may have been as many as 50 or 60 people. And yet not a single person admits to seeing who fired the shots. No witnesses. How come no witnesses?
Everybody died for cover?
At least 5 shots fired.
Depends who you talk to.
Are you surprised that there are no witnesses?
No. No.
Tim Warren, Lois and Ernest Bowenkamp, and Romaine Henry. None of them were present at the shooting, and no one who was there, including the mayor of Skidmore, would talk to us. A grand jury was convened and came up with no indictment. A person or persons unknown killed the man. Tell me something. Are you glad he's gone?
I would say we're all resting a lot better now, knowing that the man is not here.
If they catch somebody, and he's tried, and he's found guilty, would you feel that justice has been done?
No. No, because there was a whole town.
You take McFadden,
The lawyer.
you take the lawyer, and you take the courts. It wasn't the town that killed McElroy. It was them. That's the way I feel.
For not locking him up.
Well, yes.
What they did was worse than anything they could say about him. They went outside that system of justice, and they took the law in their own hands, in my opinion. And they decided they were going to get rid of him.
Do you want to know who did it?
No. No.
Would you turn in the person who did it if you had absolute proof they did it?
No. Absolutely not.
Would you, preacher?
No, I wouldn't.
Doesn't that bother your conscience a bit?
No, because there's a verse in the Old Testament that says, whosoever sheddeth man's blood by man, so shall his blood be shed.
The murder of Ken Rex McElroy remains unsolved. In theory, the investigation continues, but as far as we can determine, there is very little hope of a break in the case. Trina McElroy, they say, has offered a $10,000 reward, but so far, no takers. Through lawyer McFadden, she's signed a movie deal, of course. As for Skidmore, no one is talking whether they have anything to say or not. They now feel secure, but they are still uneasy, for among them now, there is a murderer. The American judicial system failed in Skidmore, Missouri. It failed twice.